So today, our last devotion of this week, as we think about and try to commit to this objective of becoming extravagant lovers, I want us just to recognize that in the text there's a beautiful little, almost like Jesus understands, right, because he's the creator, he's made us in his image. And one of the things that God's done for us in his creation of us is to give us our senses, right? We have the sense of touch, vision, hearing, smell, all those things. I kind of love there's a little progression that he opens up with in verse 27, that those who are willing to listen, kind of pay attention, listen, learn to listen to the Spirit. So we've been talking about doing that in our times of solitude, and that solitude is critical. Henry Nouwen, one of my favorite authors, says, without solitude and silence, it's almost impossible to live the Christian life. Wow. Without solitude and silence, it's almost impossible to live the Christian life. Solitude is that place where I pull away from all the activities around me so I can stop and slow down, like the quote I gave you yesterday from the mathematician Blaise Pascal, that in that quiet room, that most of our miseries are derived that I can't get to that quiet place. But when I do get to that quiet place, something begins to happen. And one of those things is I begin to hear. I begin to listen. A little quote, this unknown author said, "Solitude is a terrible trial, for it serves to crack open and burst apart our superficial securities." This is kind of a weighty little quote, isn't it? Solitude is a terrible trial because it serves to crack open and burst apart our superficial securities. You see, the Pharisees had created all these superficial securities. They had this paradigm that said, if we know what the rules are and we keep the rules meticulously, that's our security. That's not your security, that's your rigidity. That didn't make them more loving, it made them less loving. Oftentimes in perfectionistic efforts to try to get everything right, we don't get our relationships very right. We end up getting them wrong. So Jesus calls us to listen. And then he says we not only have to develop the skill to learn to listen, but we've got to develop the skill to learn to look. And basically he says, look in the mirror and take the plank out of your own eye. That's learning to look at ourselves honestly and look at ourselves with some healthy introspection and self-examination. And it can feel like a terrible trial because all of a sudden I look in the mirror and I go, wow, I have a lot of superficial securities. My possessions, my clothes, what I drive, where I live, who my friends are. Those are superficial securities. You see, when I get still long enough, I look at those and recognize, wow, I need that to be cracked open and burst apart because they're keeping me from being fully connected to my ultimate security of knowing Christ. And then he rolls into not just learn to listen and learn to look, but also learn to speak. Learn to speak out of a well, a storage area that's getting more and more good stuff, good things, so good fruit comes out of my mouth. Hebrews says out of the overflow, it says that good fruit flows out of the overflow of our mouth. It's in chapter 13 of Hebrews, that the fruit of lips that confess his name, that I want to store up good stuff so that what comes out of my mouth is, as in Ephesians 4:29 says, builds up, doesn't tear down, encourages, not discourages. And so he says, learn to listen, learn to look, learn to speak. And then lastly, he says, the one who hears my words and puts them into practice, learn to do. Learn to do. Practice what he's saying. Implement what he's calling us to do and who he's calling us to be. So today, as we wrap up our devotions, it's just my prayer that you are developing the skill to have heightened listening, active listening 2.0, that you are learning to look in the mirror and recognize there's a plank somewhere in my vision, and maybe it's my issue. That you're learning to speak with new grace and kindness. You're learning to bless instead of curse, and pray for those who mistreat you, and do good to those who hate you, and love your enemies. You're learning to speak something new that you're trying to store in your heart, because you're implementing who God wants you to be. There was a young musician that was visiting New York and wanted to go to Carnegie Hall to see the famous Carnegie Hall, and he was kind of struggling with his directions and couldn't find it, and was going downtown and turning all over, and finally he sees a street musician, and he pauses and rolls down his window and says, hey man, do you know how to get to Carnegie Hall? And the street musician said, yeah, I do. He goes, how do you get there? He says, practice, practice, practice. You see, there's something different between wanting to know about some place and wanting to get to that place. We listen differently. I can hear someone describe some place, but if I know I've got to go there, my listening changes. Today, part of our listening needs to call us to be people of practice. 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 I hope that you are learning to practice solitude and silence so you can hear His voice. Because when we are, there's something good that happens inside of us. May that happen today for you. As we continue this journey, and Sheltering in Place has provided for us this incredible opportunity to practice more solitude with Jesus, so we can be extravagant lovers. God bless you. Love you. Keep connecting with me. Look forward to seeing you this coming weekend. We continue in Luke and are having a ball as we just follow Jesus around and learn to live and love like Him. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.